So what I think you've seen over the last few years, especially in Asia Pacific, is has been push between outsource and offshore. I think there's been a very big push in domestic markets in Asia Pacific to outsource, to run as the markets have been growing, tap into extra demand. Companies has been using outsourcing very much as a tactic, both for telemarketing but also to handle incoming call flows. In some segments of the market, you have definitely seen offshoring, but that has been mainly driven out of, say, North America and Europe, and of course into key markets like India and the Philippines. Right? You've seen some segments of Asia Pacific also doing the offshoring. Australia would have done it into India, for instance, right, and to do it like that. But in that period as well, you've actually seen some interesting developments. You've seen a little bit of a backlash to the offshoring in the last couple of years before the slowdown of the economy. Some of the companies pulled out of India, pulled some of the resources back to North America. There have been quality issues in some of the offshoring customers accounts that you've seen. You've seen debates in Europe around how do we handle confidentiality when we offshore to a third party in the Philippines or in India. So there's been a lot of debate going on but it hasn't stopped. You have seen the offshoring growing. You have seen the contact center market in India growing exponentially, and you've definitely seen it in the Philippines. I think what you've seen is a trend is that, especially in India, a lot of this has been driven also by captive contact centers, meaning they are divisions of large companies who are taking a huge chunk of their contact centers that have been spread out over, multiple states in the US, moved it to one single location or a couple of locations in India to handle not only worldwide requirements, but actually, actual call demands at home in the North American market. So it has been very interesting from that angle, I think. So I think it's kind of a two-step discussion. I think contact centers will look at current levels of investment and saying, do we need to tighten the belt as part of any organization? But I also think that you would see, especially in certain segments where you're cutting back across the board in a company. It could be maybe in the financial sector. We're downsizing, sales force, feet on the ground, so to speak. We're downsizing even branch presence. Maybe we're consolidating branches into self-service branches. We see that in Singapore. We see it in other markets with ATMs and a little bit more snazzy ATM parlors that technically double up as a branch. Citibank has done something in Singapore last year. They introduced at one of the venues where you actually have video. You would have Cisco endpoints present at that ATM branch, and you would actually have a video capability. So I think you would see some banks, some companies looking to saying, hey, if I'm scaling down in certain portions of my business, I cannot scale down and reduce my capacity, say, in the contact center. I need to be able to have a place where I can overflow the contact and interface with customers, and that becomes the web. It becomes self-service via the web or IVR, and definitely the contact center. So I think you would see that in certain segments there'll be a requirement to invest more in the IVR infrastructure, make it a little bit more intelligent, add video to it, context, self-service integration of web with contact center definitely becomes key. Remote capability becomes even more important. So you're saying, what if I downsize my contact center? If I put some of my staff on home leave, for instance, and I suddenly have a requirement where call volume spikes because of for some reason unbeknownst to you, what do? That remote capability of having an agent work from home, for instance, is one thing. No, I think one thing that's important to bring out is in the last few years, retention in contact center has been an issue of staff. Especially in the offshoring markets, you've seen very, very high attrition rate of agents. But even in captive contact centers in our domestic Asia Pacific markets, that has been an issue, right? Now, if you can provide a better work-life balance for staff, perhaps you can work from home and you can still do your duty. I think it will make it a more interesting career for people, and I think that's going to be a continued focus as well. I think actually on the contrary, I think what we're seeing, and we're coming to an inflection point where what you have is good for a business model that fitted a different market. We are in a transition, clearly. The young Generation Y, the kids that are coming out of, actually I shouldn't call them kids, but the young adults that are coming out of university now, going into university, are going to be very different consumers than you and I. In the old setup, I would expect to have a contact center that I can call. I expect to be able to find it and if on a website, and similarly. Going forward, how are you going to connect? How are you going to interface? How are you going to offer reachability for your company with a group of, say, a segment of consumers who doesn't surf the web the way I would do it, search out a company and Google it, but they live exclusively in online communities on Facebook, and similarly, and most likely on a new service that we don't even know yet that's going to come up in the next 18 months. How do you integrate that with the infrastructure you have? That is going to be really, I think, one of the key drivers. How do we make firstly, make sure that the contact center is really actually connected to the web, so that when I'm surfing, I can talk to an agent while I'm on the website, or I can be guided by an agent that actually could pop up and say, can I help you? That we use that interface much more. But as I was saying, the integration into the social network will become even more important, I think. Then I think the next thing that you see is an investment in technologies where you merge the contact center technology with your infrastructure in your enterprise, saying that, it's not a silo technology. This technology is very much part of my so-called unified communications infrastructure today, and I should be, as an agent, able to pick an expert somewhere else in the organization that can help me with this question, because it's a very technical question. So I think you will see a change also in the contact center where the agent is not seen as a know-it-all, as an expert, because it's going to be very difficult. If you worked in a contact center for Cisco, we have hundreds of technologies. It's not feasible for you to know every single product and be able to answer it. But if we give you the capability to reach out an expert, so say there's Mr. Johnson who sits in Kuala Lumpur. Mr. Johnson really knows everything about contact center, and especially this portion. I'm going to reach out and talk to him. How do I find him? That's through presence information. It could be via instant messaging. I should have the capability of route my call to that person wherever that person sits. That is not necessarily capable. It's something that companies can do today. So making sure that the contact center is embedded into the corporate infrastructure is going to be key, both with the line of business applications and also the communications infrastructure. And then how do we then embed that into the customer facing portion of it, which is traditional contact center call in through the web, new avenues like social media and networking and so forth. I think there's going to be a lot of interesting stuff happening in the coming months.